Hi, everyone, and welcome back to Holistic Health Radio. I'm your host, Sarah Liz King. I'm an exercise physiologist and health coach, empowering you to find your healthy balance with food, fitness, and your body. Through my one-to-one and group coaching programs, both myself and my team help women regain their periods, find food freedom, and have a healthier relationship with exercise, all while gaining body confidence. Now, we've been running through our 30 days of tips for HA recovery. And today's episode is our top 5 tips for stress management that will help you on your HA recovery journey. Now, I would say that stress is probably one of the areas of recovery people don't often focus on. Would you agree?
Yeah, absolutely. I think we covered kind of the physical aspect of recovery in the last 2 episodes with exercise and nutrition.
Yeah.
I think this is a big topic, which is the psychological component of recovery, which is, like you just said, stress. And it's often overlooked because obviously hypothalamic amenorrhea is a physical condition, but there is also that mental and that psychological component to it as well.
Yeah, because your body doesn't really know the difference between you going on a really long, stressful run or your email inbox exploding and your boss kind of like shouting down your neck about getting something done or, things like that. So let's get into the stress management tips. And the first one is to think about both internal and external sources of stress. So what do we mean by external sources of stress?
We're looking at like deadlines and things like that.
Yeah. Well, it could be financial stress, be what things are going on in like relationships in your life, like anything that happens outside of you, right? You can think about it that way. And then we have internal sources of stress. And I think this is actually where a lot of stress comes from for people that have hypothalamic amenorrhea. So what are we talking about when we talk about internal sources of stress?
Yeah, we're looking at like rigid food rules, black and white thinking, unrealistic expectations, which for me were just tick, tick, tick.
Yeah.
All those boxes.
Yeah. I would say if you classify yourself as kind of a mild perfectionist, which, look, perfectionism is still something that is a common thread in my life and something that I've just gotten better at managing and recognizing and kind of being more compassionate about and kind of changing my expectations of. But I think it often comes up for people who struggle with hypothalamic amenorrhea and, food rules, black and white thinking. I think even, a really common one is like whether or not you do recovery right.
Goodness, yes.
And putting all that pressure on yourself that, if you make a mistake or something goes wrong, that it's all fallen apart and you might as well just give up anyways. Like that is another really good example of kind of that black and white thinking. So becoming more aware of those kind of sources of stress. And you can do like a little bit of a deep dive. I think one of the things that I often ask my clients is, the first question is like, do you feel like you're stressed? And what are the things that are going on in and around your life that might be sneaky, subtle forms of stress, right?
Yeah.
And then we can look at tackling them, right? And there's a lot of different ways that we can tackle them. And one of the great ones we have is in the Healing HA program, we go through all of the different, acceptance forms of stress management, cognitive forms, emotional regulation, all those kinds of tips and tools that can really help you feel not more, I don't know if more in control is the right word.
Yeah, potentially.
Better regulated with your stress, right? Let's move on to the next one. I'll let you take this one away.
Perfect. I really like this next tip, and it's live slowly for one day a week. And this, to me, 4 years ago would have been a very foreign concept.
Yeah.
How do you live slowly? Because I was always go, 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 which I feel like a lot of people will relate with. But, choosing one day where you don't have to set an alarm, where you can take the time to make a nourishing breakfast and actually sit down and eat it without distractions or without that stress of the rest of the day kind of catching up to you. Like, what would your ideal day look like?
Oh, I can tell you because I woke up on, like, I'm going to tell you about my most recent live slowly for a day, and I'll ask you about yours. It was actually this weekend. I woke up on Saturday and I just took my time to have breakfast, and then I sat and read a little bit of the news on my phone. Like, I had an article saved that I really wanted to read, and then took the puppy. And it was a bit of a gloomy day, so drove to Centennial Park, which is a beautiful park that's very close by to where I live, and just a really slow walk at puppy pace, you know, stopping, sniffing, looking around, got a coffee, had a snack. And the rest of the day was, you know, just home and resting and cooking food and, you know, doing a bit of work on my laptop, but there was no pressure.
Yeah.
I didn't have to do anything. I didn't have to be anywhere. And obviously that is a privilege, but I think carving those days into your life is so important when your body's really in need of rest and to re-nourish itself, and to find, I guess, find this way of being the calm version of yourself, which is so hard to do when you're like, go, go, go all the time.
Absolutely. And I think what you just said is really important. Like, yes, it's a privilege, but you can carve pockets of time out for yourself. So even if it's not a full day, maybe it's an hour during the week, or you get up a little bit earlier in the morning so you're not as rushed to get to work and things like that. So it doesn't, like, one day a week would be ideal, but if that seems like a bit of a stretch at the moment, don't throw this tip out altogether. Kind of look at where you can find those pockets of time during the week.
We call our white space. What's your idea of your perfect slow day?
Goodness, definitely not setting an alarm. I love when I don't have to set an alarm. Getting up, having breakfast, and then climbing back into bed with my cup of coffee. And I have my little Kindle holder and my Kindle page turner, so I can just be all nice and cozy. Now that it's getting like colder here in Australia, I'm nice and cozy in bed with my book. And then I always really, and something I found during recovery, I really like doing something creative, like with my hands. I can't paint or draw, but if you give me like a color by numbers or paint by numbers, I'm set. I find it so therapeutic, and just putting on some music in the background and just spending a bit of time, you know, internally with myself, really. I really enjoy that.
Yeah. And if you're struggling to kind of think of how to live slowly for a day, see if you can find someone in your life to emulate. Do you have someone whose day doesn't feel like it has a lot in that day, but they feel so content and they're actually so happy with those kind of slower, calmer days, and use that as a source of inspiration? Like, do you have a calm, centered, like really fulfilled person in your life? Because, you know, that is something that you can kind of go like, oh, like, I don't have to be doing 5 million things in order to feel good. Like, it's possible to feel that way with just simplicity. So I think that's a really good tip that we mentioned. And I'm going to dive into the next tip for stress management, which is to just notice your breathing, right? Often when we're stressed, there's physical manifestations of how our body senses stress. I think it's often quite difficult for people that have had a very strained relationship with food and exercise in their body, because we're so good at kind of like switching things off and not paying attention to physiological sensations. But when you notice there's a lot of things going on in your life, maybe there's an element of overwhelm, it's really stopping to slow down. And the first thing that you can pay attention to really help with your stress management is regulating your breathing, right? So breathing helps with our nervous system regulation. You want to explain a little bit about that?
Yeah, so it really helps you tap into your parasympathetic nervous system, which is our rest and digest. And usually when we're stressed, we're in our sympathetic nervous system, which you might hear referred to as your fight or flight or freeze response. So really bringing the focus back to big, deep breaths can help center yourself, you know, psychologically, but also physiologically. Helps your body kind of go into that rest and digest state, and remind it that, okay, we're actually not in danger. There is no threat. We're safe, which I think is really important.
And I think one of the biggest benefits that comes from noticing your breathing and taking those slow, deep breaths is oftentimes when our breathing is really shallow and when we're in that fight and flight mode, our brain is also really busy. Lots of thoughts are swirling around, and it can just bring the intensity of that down a notch, so that you have better capacity to kind of get back to a more logical state of thinking and choose your next best step in terms of like maybe you need to do some form of action to take care of yourself. And initially it can be really hard to remember to focus on your breathing. So I think adding it as a skill that you practice day to day can be really useful, and pairing it up with something else that you regularly do can be really helpful.
Brushing your teeth or waiting for your oats to cook in the microwave, whatever it might be.
Waiting for the kettle to boil. Even before, like maybe you have a particular meal that might be a little bit more stressful for you to eat. Taking a few deep breaths and kind of setting some reminders for yourself that would be really helpful to hear in that moment can be such a good practice for stress management and really help the overall picture of your HA recovery. So I'm really glad we touched on that one. Now, this one is kind of similar because often breathing goes hand in hand with this particular stress management technique. Do you want to tell us a little bit about what it is?
Yes, absolutely. So, when you're stressed, you might be feeling really overwhelmed or anxious, and you've got a lot of these emotions kind of flooding your system, that again makes it really hard to make a logical decision and move forward. So something like you said goes hand in hand is giving guided meditation a try. And it's definitely a foreign concept. I know it was for me. It was very, very strange, but that's why it's one of those things that you need to kind of give it a go a few times and see if you like it. And the great thing, with our clients and with the Healing HA program is we do have a bunch of these guided meditations that are centered around recovery and the emotions that you're feeling and the situations that you're experiencing. So it's really perfect for that.
Yeah. And I think what happens within that recovery journey and why guided meditation can be so, so helpful is, number one, there's often this element of decision fatigue and not trusting yourself. And I think some of the guided meditations that we often encourage people to go towards are, building that element of trust within yourself and going through with all of these recovery aligned behaviors and elements of self-compassion. And it's so much easier to hear someone kind of like with a warm voice guiding you towards being more compassionate to yourself than it is to kind of muster up the energy to do that all the time. Other things that are really good that we have guided meditations on things like body image. We've all had a really bad body image day, and overcoming fear. Fear is such a strong thing that comes up so many times, whether it's fear of weight gain, fear of judgment, fear of quote unquote losing control. It can just be such a good tool to help you in the moment get out of your brain and allow something else to come in and really support you in making, a good decision and taking care of yourself. So guided meditation, really, really helpful.
Yeah, and I think you touched on it a little bit too, like the self-compassion element and how it is really difficult to treat yourself with self-compassion, and having someone else actually guide you through that until you build the skill of self-compassion, where you won't always need to go back to these guided meditations because you'll have that confidence and experience to actually help navigate that stressful situation.
Yeah. And I've done, for my one-to-one clients, I sometimes record guided meditations specifically for them. And what they often come back with is, telling me a story of like a difficult moment that they had. And then, they heard elements of my voice coming through. Yeah, from that guided meditation. But then eventually they said, like, that voice becomes my voice. And I think that's really what guided meditation can be around. Like someone else is helping you create that narrative in your mind that doesn't feel quite strong enough yet, but maybe you believe it like 10%, and then over time, as you hear it more and more, you start to believe that that is actually true for yourself.
Yeah. I absolutely love that.
Yeah. Now, our last and final tip for stress management is simple, but probably most essential.
And effective.
Yeah.
Yeah. It is to get enough sleep. And I am probably the biggest sleep advocate. I know from my own recovery journey that if I don't get enough sleep, I'm just a mess. I'm a hot mess.
Yeah. Because when we think about it, the easiest way to think about it is like, think about a sleep deprived baby, right? Now, we know babies don't know how to understand their emotions, regulate, and all that kind of thing. But when you are sleep deprived, it's so much more difficult to manage your moods. They're going to be all over the place, to kind of have control of your thinking. You're not going to be as productive. It's going to make decision making and following through on those recovery aligned actions so much more difficult. let alone thinking about the physiological restorative processes that happen when you sleep, and them not getting enough of a chance to actually do the good work that they need to be doing. So how many hours of sleep do we usually recommend?
We recommend at least 7 to 9. I personally kind of need to go a bit more towards the 10, I've learned. So you'll find what you need, but definitely in recovery between 7 or 9.
Yeah. And oftentimes people who have hypothalamic amenorrhea have sleep disruptions. It's very, very common when you are undernourished to not be able to get that good quality sleep. It's oftentimes one of the really beautiful things that clients tell us in those initial stages of recovery. Oh my gosh, I'm sleeping so much better. I'm not waking up as often throughout the night. You know, I don't feel really hungry and then can't go back to sleep because I'm getting enough energy in. So sleep is so essential. And, you know, think about the really easy things that you can be doing, like a bedtime routine.
Yeah.
So making sure that you're not doom scrolling on your phone for too many hours before you go to bed. I'd have some technology free hours if you can. You know, having a lovely warm shower.
Yeah.
Reading.
Yeah. I used to have something that I did during my recovery pretty religiously was a sleep routine, and it really helped me because I noticed when I would get into bed at the end of the day when I wasn't as busy, that's when my mind would just start running a million miles an hour, and I would feel my body and I would feel how it's changing, and just in the sheets it was really uncomfortable. So implementing that sleep routine really trained my brain. So I would put my phone down, grab a nice warm bath, I do some light stretching by my bed for 10 minutes, and then I get into bed with a book. And over a few weeks of actually doing that, I noticed getting into the bath, I'd be yawning. And then I wouldn't really be able to make it through my stretch, like little 10-minute routine that I had, because I was just tired.
Yeah.
And I think it's such an underrated tip, but the sleep routine is golden.
Absolutely golden, because your brain picks up on the cues and the actions that you're doing and goes, oh, this is the lead up to us always going to bed and falling asleep. And also keeping your bed as a sacred space where you predominantly sleep. Like, don't work in it endlessly. I think that's a really big one, because then it becomes a space where you're really stressed and stressed. Make it cool and dark and comfortable when you're in your bedroom. In the wintertime, make sure you're nice and cozy. Then there's also other things like a sleep mask, which can be really helpful. I know I don't really have dark curtains where I live. Earplugs if you need them.
Like nice pajamas. I just bought my first Peter Alexander winter set. And I'm so excited to get into bed.
I've also seen some really cute like flannel sets at Kmart, not gonna lie. Yeah. So those are our top 5 tips for stress management for hypothalamic amenorrhea recovery. If you found them useful and you really enjoyed this episode and you're watching on YouTube, be sure to give it a thumbs up and subscribe, because we will be releasing more top tips very, very shortly. If you're listening on your favorite podcast platform and you can leave a rating and review, please be sure to do so. It really helps support the show and helps more people find this amazing free resource. And if you are someone looking for support on your hypothalamic amenorrhea recovery journey, be sure to subscribe to the newsletter by clicking the link in the show notes. You can grab a free HA recovery checklist, which gives you all the things that you need to be focusing on for your HA recovery journey, and writes them out plainly so you can see them all. And we will be back, of course, next week with more tips and a fresh new episode that you can wrap your ears and eyes around. Take care of yourself until then.